it would be fair to say that you shocked the community when you berated both the Israeli government for its policies and the leadership of diaspora Jews for not speaking out about those policies. You said the Israeli government has to recognize that their actions directly impact me as a Jew living here in London in the UK. Do you feel that since then, the distance between Jews living here and in Israel has grown over the last 6 years?
The sort of question implies there was a distance to start off with. I guess that the relationship between diaspora Jewry and Israel has been complex from the very beginning. I mean, it was complex even when the whole issue of the Balfour Declaration came out in 1917, where Jewish leadership in this country and many Jews in this country were very concerned about that declaration, what it might mean in terms of their rights here in this country. And some of them were antagonistic towards that for that very reason. But at the establishment of the State of Israel, other than very few, I would say that the majority of UK Jewry, majority of diaspora Jewry, found themselves at one with the aspirations of the State of Israel, and certainly found themselves at one with the founding fathers' dreams of how that state should be constructed and the values of which it should be based on. And Israel went through its very complex birth and the pains that went with it, certainly stood behind Israel every single time that it faced adversity and faced existential threat. And so there's no issue about that, and there's no issue today about that as well. I mean, when Israel is under existential threat, you will find there's a completely unanimous, grounded force from this community behind Israel. But the issue comes to the issue of the nature, as Tzipi Livni said, the nature of the state and how we as Jews think about that state and how we think about our identity. Now, the vast majority of Jews in this country have Israel as the epicenter of their Jewish identity. And I'm sure Hannah can talk about that. But it's Israel in the way they conceive as Jews should actually be living their lives. And it does go to values, and it goes to these propositions around what sort of state we want. And where I was berating, I don't think I was berating, but I was making, the point I was trying to make was that in the way that Israel carries out its functions as a state, trying to find a solution to its existential threats, and therefore find an existential place where it can exist in harmony in the community of nations. It's got to do that in a way which is consistent with Jewish values. And when it does things which are inconsistent with Jewish values, it impacts my identity as a Jew, because I associate my identity as a Jew with Israel. And so, yes, in answer to your question, I think that the distance is becoming more complex. I think that the emerging generation in this country and in other parts of the diaspora world are finding this as an issue more and more difficult to deal with and more difficult to come to terms with.
Thank you very much, Mick. Professor Eldad, you very recently brought out a new book about, among other things, how right-wing politicians, when they come to power, suddenly start changing their views. What we call in Israel, dvarim sheroim misham lo roim mikan. What we see from here, you don't see there. And I thought that specific idea is also very apt when we're talking about how the relationship between Israelis and Jews in the diaspora isn't always based on the same base, on the same ideas, and very often we don't see things in the same way. And I want to think, do you feel that the diaspora are taking Israelis for granted and in some ways holding them to standards which are unrealistic?
Well, I'm afraid this is the case. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm a plastic surgeon, but it seems by defining Israel as the epicenter of Jewish identity in diaspora, and still not agreeing with this identity is called schizophrenia. There's only one thing that is common between being punctuate and being left-wing thinker in Israel, is that there's nobody there to appreciate it. And it seems that this is not the case in the diaspora because there's a lot of people to appreciate anti-Israeli positions. I'm not sure this is the reason why the liberal, the left wing among Jewish diaspora is adopting these positions, but it helps. When I try to analyze the patterns of decision makers among right-wing leaders in Israel and what happened to them when they reach power, it seems that we can divide the discussion for two generations. The ideologic generation, which Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir belong to, and the generation following it, Netanyahu and Olmert and Sharon. It seems that it is very much so among diaspora Jewry. The first or the older generations, it is very clear in the Pew's survey in the United States, are much more supportive of Israel from ideological point of view. The younger generations that tends to adopt a more instrumental attitude toward Israel, it's very nice to have them here just in case, are losing the ideological, valued attitude toward Israel as a homeland. It is quite natural for every one of the Italians to look at Italy as a homeland, not as a safe refuge, or in Britain. The Brits do not look at Britain as safe refuge, but as a homeland. But when we speak about Israel as a homeland, as a value on its own, we are accused of being not so much enlightened. We are fascist. We are nationalist. This is the normal attitude of every nation in the world toward its homeland. And therefore, as this is my attitude toward the land of Israel, this is my attitude toward the Jewish people. Not as instrumental, not as a bank machine or a source of human power just to make aliyah and strengthen us, and not the other way around to expect diaspora look at Israel as a self-refuge, but as an internal component of their identity, their national identity. And if you want your identity to become something else, it's very nice, but we are not going to cater for these demands.
Thank you, Professor Eldad.